The day I came home wounded should have been the day my family wrapped their arms around me. Instead, it became the day they threw me away. I was 32 years old when the accident happened. For nearly a decade, I had worked construction jobs across the state, taking on the hardest projects because the pay was better. The work was exhausting, dangerous, and often lonely, but I did it gladly. Every paycheck helped my family. When my younger brother needed college tuition, I paid it. When my parents struggled with mortgage payments, I sent money. When my sister wanted help opening her boutique, I emptied my savings account without hesitation. I always believed family came first. Then one rainy afternoon, everything changed. A steel beam slipped during a construction project and crashed into the scaffolding where I was working. The impact threw me nearly 20 feet. I survived, but barely. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. Lucky, that word made me laugh every time I heard it. I spent 4 months in the hospital recovering from multiple fractures, a shattered knee, and severe nerve damage in my right arm. By the time I was discharged, I walked with a limp and couldn't lift heavy objects anymore. My construction career was over. I had no job, no savings left after medical bills, and no idea what came next. But I wasn't afraid. I still had my family, or so I thought. When I arrived at my parents' house carrying a single duffel bag, my mother opened the door and stared at me. For a moment, I expected her to hug me. Instead, her eyes dropped to the cane in my hand. "You look terrible," she said. The words stung more than I expected. "I've had a rough year." I replied with a weak smile. My father appeared behind her. "Can you work yet?" He asked immediately. No welcome home, no concern, just business, not yet. His face darkened. "That's a problem." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. Over dinner that night, I realized something had changed while I was gone. My family no longer saw me as their dependable provider. They saw me as dead weight. Every conversation somehow returned to money. How long would my recovery take? How much assistance would I need? Could I contribute to bills? Did I have disability payments coming? The questions felt less like concern and more like calculations. As the weeks passed, things only got worse. My brother rarely spoke to me unless he needed something. My sister acted annoyed whenever I occupied space in the house. Even my parents seemed frustrated by my presence. One evening, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "I don't know how long we can keep supporting him." My mother whispered, "Supporting me?" I had spent years supporting them. My father sighed heavily. "He needs to figure something out. It's like having another bill." Those words hit harder than the steel beam ever had. I quietly returned to my room before they noticed I had heard. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and replayed every sacrifice I'd made. The birthdays I missed while working overtime, the vacations I never took, the dreams I postponed because someone in the family needed help. Had any of it mattered? Apparently not. 3 months later, the answer became painfully clear. My father called a family meeting. Everyone sat around the dining table. The atmosphere felt strange, cold, formal. My stomach twisted with dread. Dad cleared his throat. "We need to talk about the future." I nodded, "Okay." He exchanged a glance with my mother. "We think it's time for you to find another place to stay." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. "What?" My sister crossed her arms. "This situation isn't working." "What situation?" "You living here," my brother said bluntly. I stared at them, speechless. My mother avoided eye contact. "You're a grown man." "I'm recovering from a life-changing injury. We know that," she said softly. "But we can't carry you forever." The irony nearly made me laugh. Carry me? I'd carried this family for years. The anger rising inside me wasn't as strong as the heartbreak. I looked around the table. at the people I'd loved my entire life. Not one face showed sympathy, not one, just impatience, like they were discussing an unwanted guest. Finally, my father slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a small amount of cash, barely enough for a week at a motel. This should help you get started. Get started, as if I weren't being thrown away. I slowly stood. No one stopped me, no one apologized, no one changed their mind. The next morning, I loaded my few belongings into my old pickup truck. The same truck I'd used for years to help my family move furniture, haul supplies, and solve their problems. Now it carried everything I owned. As I prepared to leave, my mother stepped onto the porch. For a brief moment, hope flickered inside me. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd tell me to stay. Instead, she simply said, "Take care of yourself." Then she went back inside. The door closed, and that was it. No hugs, no tears, no love, just silence. I drove for hours without a destination. The pain in my knee worsened with every mile. The emptiness in my chest felt even worse. By sunset, I found myself on an old country road I hadn't traveled in years. At the end of that road sat my grandfather's abandoned farm. Grandpa had died 5 years earlier. Unlike the rest of the family, he had always believed in me. He never cared about money. He cared about character. As I pulled into the overgrown driveway, memories flooded back. I remembered helping him in the fields as a boy. I remembered his warm laugh. And most of all, I remembered his beloved bees. Hundreds of hives once covered the property. Whenever life became difficult, Grandpa would smile and say the same thing. Take care of the bees, and they'll take care of you. At the time, I thought it was just another one of his old sayings. Standing there alone as darkness settled over the farm, those words echoed through my mind. The house was weathered. The fields were neglected. The hives looked abandoned. But somehow, it felt more welcoming than my family's home ever had. I parked the truck and stared across the property. For the first time in months, I felt something other than pain. Not happiness, not yet, but possibility. I had lost my family. I had lost my career. I had lost the life I once knew. What I didn't realize was that this broken farm and Grandpa's forgotten bees were about to give me everything back. The first morning on Grandpa's farm began with silence. Not the uncomfortable silence I had endured in my parents' house. This was different. It was peaceful. The rising sun painted the fields gold as a cool breeze drifted through the tall grass. Birds sang from the trees surrounding the property, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint hum of bees. For the first time in nearly a year, I woke up without feeling like a burden. The farmhouse was in rough shape. Dust covered every surface, several windows were cracked, and the roof leaked in 2 places. Still, it felt more like home than anywhere else. I spent the next few days cleaning. My injured knee protested every movement, and my damaged arm often went numb, but I kept going. I repaired what I could and learned to live with what I couldn't. Money was running low. The small amount my father had given me was almost gone, and my disability payments barely covered groceries. I needed a plan. One afternoon, while clearing out Grandpa's old workshop, I stumbled upon a wooden chest hidden beneath a workbench. The lock had rusted away years ago. When I opened it, I discovered dozens of notebooks neatly stacked inside. Each one was filled with Grandpa's handwriting. Curious, I sat down and opened the first notebook. The title on the front page read, "Beekeeping Lessons for Whoever Comes After Me." I froze. It felt as though Grandpa were speaking directly to me. For hours, I sat there reading. The notebooks contained everything. How to maintain hives, how to raise healthy colonies, how to identify diseases, how to harvest honey, How to sell products and build customer trust. Grandpa had documented decades of experience. On the final page of the first notebook, a note caught my attention. If you're reading this, life probably didn't go the way you planned. That's okay. The bees don't care about your mistakes. They don't care about your scars. They only care that you show up every day. My eyes filled with tears. After months of being treated like I was worthless, those words felt like medicine. The next morning, I decided to inspect the old apiary. Most of the hives looked abandoned. Several had collapsed entirely. But not all of them. To my surprise, a handful of colonies were still alive. Against all odds, they had survived. Much like me, the sight ignited something inside me, hope. I spent every day learning from Grandpa's notebooks and rebuilding the apiary one hive at a time. The work wasn't easy. There were moments when my knee hurt so badly I could barely stand. There were days when I dropped tools because my arm wouldn't cooperate. More than once, I questioned whether I was capable of doing it, but every time doubt appeared, I remembered Grandpa's words. Show up every day, so I did. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, the farm began to change. The grass was trimmed. The fences were repaired. The hives multiplied. The gentle hum of thousands of bees became the soundtrack of my life. I discovered something remarkable about beekeeping. The bees didn't care that I limped. They didn't judge my injuries. They didn't measure my worth by how much money I earned. They simply responded to effort. The more care I gave them, the more they thrived. And somehow, watching them thrive helped me heal too. By the end of the first season, I harvested my first batch of honey. The golden liquid flowed from the frames like sunlight. I filled a few jars and attached simple labels. Grandpa's honey, nothing fancy, just honest. The following weekend, I rented a small booth at a local farmer's market. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe I'd sell a few jars, maybe enough to buy groceries. Instead, something unexpected happened. People loved it. Customers kept returning to my table. They sampled the honey and immediately bought multiple jars. Several asked if I had more. One elderly woman smiled after tasting it. This reminds me of the honey my father used to bring home when I was a child. That single comment meant more than she could possibly know. For the first time since my accident, I felt proud of something I had created. The next week, demand grew even larger. Word spread throughout nearby towns. Soon local stores began contacting me. A small bakery wanted to use my honey in their recipes. A cafe wanted regular deliveries. Then a specialty food shop placed an order bigger than anything I had imagined. The tiny business was growing fast. Every dollar I earned went back into the farm. I bought new equipment, expanded the apiary, restored additional hives. What started as survival gradually became success. As months passed, my confidence returned. Not because of the money, because I finally understood something important. My value had never been tied to my construction job. It had never depended on what I could provide for other people. My family had made me believe I was useless once I couldn't support them financially. The bees taught me otherwise. I was still capable, still worthy, still strong, just in a different way. Then one afternoon, nearly 2 years after arriving at the farm, I received an unexpected phone call. It was my cousin Daniel. We hadn't spoken in months. "Hey," he said nervously, "I heard you've got some kind of honey business now." I smiled. "Something like that. You know everyone's talking about it, right?" "What do you mean, your family?" I remained silent. Daniel hesitated. "They've heard you're doing pretty well." Of course they had. Success has a way of attracting attention. Especially from people who ignored you when you were struggling. "What are they saying?" I asked. "They don't believe it." I laughed. "That sounds about right. They think the stories are exaggerated." I looked across the fields where hundreds of thriving hives now stood beneath the afternoon sun. The farm was alive again, just as Grandpa would have wanted. Let them think whatever they want, I said. Daniel chuckled. You might not have that choice for long. After hanging up, I stood quietly among the bees. Their familiar hum surrounded me. For some reason, a strange feeling settled in my chest. A feeling that the peaceful life I had built was about to be interrupted. Because, somewhere out there, the family that had discarded me was finally beginning to realize they had made a very expensive mistake, and they were about to come looking for what they believed belonged to them. 3 years after I arrived at Grandpa's farm with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken future, my life looked completely different. The old farmhouse had been fully restored. The neglected fields were thriving. More than 2,000 healthy beehives stretched across the property. Most importantly, Grandpa's honey had become one of the most respected honey brands in the region. What started with a few jars at a farmer's market had grown into a business that supplied grocery stores, bakeries, restaurants, and specialty food shops across several states. I employed 23 people. Many of them were injured workers like me, people who had been told their best days were behind them. Together we proved otherwise. Life wasn't perfect. I still walked with a slight limp. My arms still hurt during cold weather. But I was happy, something I hadn't been in years. Then the letter arrived. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. For several minutes, I simply stared at the envelope. It had been almost 4 years since I'd spoken to anyone in my family. Not one phone call, not one birthday card, not one holiday invitation. Silence. Now suddenly there was a letter. I opened it carefully. The message was short. We miss you. Family should stay together. We'd love to come visit and reconnect. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of what happened. Just a convenient desire to reconnect. I almost laughed. The timing wasn't difficult to understand. By now, local newspapers had featured my business several times. My success was no secret. They hadn't come back because they missed me. They came back because they found out I was worth something again. For a moment, I considered throwing the letter away. Instead, I called my mother. She answered immediately, almost as if she'd been waiting by the phone. Michael, she exclaimed, I've missed hearing your voice. The words felt strange coming from someone who hadn't spoken to me in years. I got your letter. Oh, good. A brief silence followed. Neither of us mentioned the past. Finally, she said, we'd really like to visit. I knew exactly what was happening. But part of me wanted to see them. Not because I missed them, because I wanted answers. Fine, I said. Next Saturday, the entire family arrived together. My parents, my brother Ryan, my sister Amanda, even a few relatives who had barely acknowledged my existence before. The moment their vehicles pulled into the driveway, I noticed something interesting. They weren't looking at me, they were staring at the farm, at the renovated buildings, the modern equipment. The endless rows of thriving hives, the signs of success. Their eyes widened, their mouths hung slightly open. I almost felt sorry for them, almost. My father stepped forward first. You've done well for yourself. No hello. No apology, just an observation about money. Some things never changed. Thanks. I replied. We spent the next hour touring the property. The entire time, they asked questions. How many employees did I have? How many hives? How much honey did we produce? How many stores carried our products? The questions became increasingly specific, increasingly financial. Not one person asked how I survived after they threw me out. Not one person asked how difficult recovery had been. Not one person mentioned the years of silence. Finally, we gathered around a large table near the farmhouse. I waited. Sooner or later, they would reveal their real reason for coming. It didn't take long. Ryan cleared his throat. So, we've been talking. I leaned back. Here it comes. Dad nodded. We believe Grandpa would have wanted the family to share in this success. There it was. The truth, not hidden, not disguised, just greed. I looked around the table. No one seemed embarrassed. No one seemed ashamed. Amanda smiled as though she were proposing something completely reasonable. After all, we're family. The irony nearly made me choke. Family, that word suddenly mattered now. My mother reached for my hand. We all sacrificed for this family over the years. I slowly pulled my hand away. Sacrificed? The room grew quiet. Dad shifted uncomfortably. What are you saying? I looked directly at him. I'm saying it's interesting hearing people talk about family after abandoning me when I needed them most. No one spoke. For the first time all afternoon, they looked uncomfortable. Ryan frowned. That was years ago. Exactly. My voice remained calm. You left me alone when I could barely walk. Mom's eyes lowered. We made mistakes. Mistakes, I repeated. You called me a burden. Silence. You told me I was like another bill. More silence. You handed me cash and sent me away. Nobody denied it. Because they couldn't. The truth was sitting at the table with us. Finally, Dad sighed. We can't change the past. No, I nodded. But we can learn from it. Amanda folded her arms. So what does that mean? I smiled. It means Grandpa already made his decision. Confusion spread across their faces. I stood and retrieved a folder from the house. Inside were legal documents. Documents I'd discovered among Grandpa's belongings years earlier. I placed them on the table. My father examined them first. His face immediately lost color. The property, the apiary, the equipment, everything, Grandpa had legally left it all to me years before his death. Exclusively to me, not the family, not shared ownership, not divided inheritance, mine. I watched the realization spread across their faces. The business they wanted a piece of had never belonged to them, legally, morally, or emotionally. Ryan slammed the papers onto the table. That's not fair. I couldn't help laughing. For years, I had imagined this moment. The anger, the arguments, the satisfaction, but surprisingly, I felt none of those things, only clarity. You know what's unfair? I asked quietly. Being abandoned by the people you spent your life helping. Nobody had an answer because there wasn't one. The family that once viewed me as worthless had returned expecting wealth. Instead, they found consequences. As they sat there staring at Grandpa's documents, I realized something important. The greatest revenge wasn't becoming richer than them. It wasn't proving them wrong. It was building a life so successful that their approval no longer mattered. And as the bees hummed peacefully beyond the farmhouse, I knew the hardest conversation was still ahead. Because now that their demands had failed, they would have to face something even more painful, the truth about what they had lost. The morning after they left, the farm felt quieter than usual. Not because the bees had changed. Thousands of hives still hummed across the fields like a living ocean, but because something inside me had finally settled. For years, I had imagined that confrontation ending in anger, shouting, or some dramatic sense of victory. I had expected satisfaction. I had expected revenge to feel like fire in my chest. Instead, all I felt was calm. My family had driven away without another word after seeing the legal documents. My father had tried to argue. My mother had cried. My siblings had blamed, justified, and rewrote history in their own minds, but none of it changed the truth. Grandpa had chosen me, not them. By sunset, their cars were gone from the driveway, leaving only tire tracks in the dust. I stood there for a long time, staring at those marks until the wind softened them into nothing. That's when I realized something simple but powerful. They had come expecting to take my life apart again. Instead, they had only confirmed how little I needed them. Days turned into weeks, the tension faded, replaced by routine. Orders for Grandpa's honey continued to grow, and new contracts arrived from larger distributors. A regional organic chain signed a long-term deal. A health brand wanted exclusive labeling rights. Everything was expanding faster than I could have ever planned. But something in me had changed. I no longer measured success in numbers alone. I measured it in peace. One afternoon, while inspecting the northern hives, I noticed an old worker struggling with a collapsed box. He was young, maybe 20, with a damaged leg brace similar to mine after the accident. Without hesitation, I walked over and helped him lift it. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded quickly, embarrassed. "I just needed a second." I smiled. I used to need a lot more than a second. That made him look up. We stood there for a moment in silence, bees circling gently around us. "You ever feel like you're done?" he asked quietly. I understood exactly what he meant. I looked across the fields, at everything Grandpa had left behind, at everything I had rebuilt from nothing. All the time, I admitted, right after I got hurt, I thought my life was over. He didn't respond, just waited. But it wasn't the end. I continued. It was just the part where I had to rebuild differently. Something in his expression softened. I handed him a spare tool. "Stay with it. The bees don't care how slow you heal." He laughed under his breath. "That sounds like something a wise old man would say." I glanced toward the farmhouse. He was. That night, I sat alone on the porch. The same porch where my family once stood asking for shares, percentages, and ownership. Now it felt different. Not empty, just mine. A warm light spilled from inside the house. Inside, my small team was finishing packaging for a large shipment. Laughter drifted out through the open windows. People who had once been written off by the world were building something real together. I thought about my parents, my brother, my sister. I didn't hate them. That surprised me. For a long time, I had believed revenge meant watching them suffer. But life had already done something more complicated. They weren't destroyed. They were just no longer part of my world. And that was enough. A week later, I received one final message. Not a letter this time. A voice note from my mother. Her voice was tired. "Michael, your father's been sick. Nothing serious, but we've been talking. I don't know if we handled things right. I hope you're okay." She paused. Then added quietly, "Your grandfather would be proud of you." The message ended. I didn't replay it. I didn't delete it either. I just sat with it, not forgiveness, not anger. Something in between, human. That spring, I expanded the farm again. New hives were installed on the far eastern field, and I started a small training program for injured workers and people rebuilding their lives. We taught beekeeping, farming basics, and small business skills. I called it the Grand Hive Initiative. The name felt right. Every participant had a story of loss. Some had been injured, some had been abandoned, some had simply been forgotten by the world, but here they learned the same lesson I had learned years ago. You don't need to be whole to be useful. You just need to keep showing up. One afternoon, I walked to the oldest hive on the property, the one Grandpa had built himself decades ago. It was still strong, still alive, still producing honey like it always had. I placed my hand gently on its wooden frame. For a moment I could almost hear his voice again. "Take care of the bees and they'll take care of you." I smiled. "I get it now," I whispered. The bees moved around me, calm and steady, like they had always known something I was only beginning to understand. Years later, people would call my story a comeback, a success story, a revenge story, but none of those words ever felt quite right. Because what happened wasn't about getting back at my family. It was about getting back to myself. The family that discarded me thought they had ended my story when I came home wounded. But they didn't understand something simple. You can lose people who were never meant to stay. You can lose your health, your job, your past life. But if you're still standing, still breathing, then the story isn't over. It's just waiting for a better chapter. And mine was written in honey,